ready for short horror stories that will make you scream or cringe in discomfort. The old mansion had stood for decades, its grandeur and beauty slowly being consumed by the passing of time. The once lush gardens were now overgrown with weeds. The sound of crickets and the creaking of trees, the only signs of life. It was said that anyone who stepped foot inside the mansion would never leave, that the very walls had a way of trapping the living, keeping them prisoner for eternity. I didn't believe it, of course. I was a skeptic, always looking for rational explanations, or the irrational. So when my friend Sarah suggested we explore the mansion, I agreed. We arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. The air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of decay. As we approached the entrance, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The massive wooden door seemed to loom over us, its surface covered in dust and cobwebs. Sarah pushed open the creaking door, and we stepped inside. The interior was just as impressive as the exterior, with sweeping staircases and chandeliers that cast flickering shadows across the walls. But it was the atmosphere that really caught my attention. A feeling of malevolent presence seemed to permeate every corner of the mansion. I couldn't shake the sensation that we were being watched. We began to explore, our footsteps echoing off the walls. We discovered a room filled with antique dolls, their glassy eyes seeming to stare straight through us. Another room was dedicated to Tax, Ittermy, the animals' bodies frozen in time, their faces twisted into cruel grins. As we delved deeper into the mansion, I started to feel a creeping sense of dread. It was as if the house was shifting and twisting around us, making it impossible to find our way back out. Sarah seemed to be enjoying herself, her laughter echoing off the walls. But I knew she was hiding something. She was always like this, her smile masking a deep-seated fear. We stumbled upon a room that seemed frozen in time. The furniture was still set for a dinner party, the tablecloth and glasses intact. But it was the centerpiece that caught my attention, a large, ornate box with intricate carvings on its surface. Sarah's eyes lit up as she approached the box. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "I don't know." She reached out a trembling hand and touched the carvings. As soon as she did, the room began to shift and distort around us. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thick with an unseen presence. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. We were plunged into darkness, the only sound the creaking of the old wooden floorboards beneath our feet. Sarah's laughter was gone, replaced by a terrified scream. I tried to grab her arm, but she was already running. Disappearing into the darkness, I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. The darkness seemed to swirl around us, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of us. We stumbled through the winding corridors, the mansion seeming to shift and twist around us. I could feel its malevolent presence closing in, trapping us like prey. Finally, we reached a door that seemed to lead outside. I pushed it open, and a warm gust of air hit us like a slap in the face. But as we emerged into the daylight, I realized we were not outside at all. We were back in the mansion, standing in front of the very same door. Sarah's eyes were black as coal, her skin deathly pale. "We'll never leave," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I tried to run, but my feet felt heavy, as if rooted to the spot. The mansion seemed to be closing in around us, its walls pressing down on us like a vice. And then, everything went black when I came to. I was lying on the floor, my head throbbing with pain. Sarah was nowhere to be seen. I stumbled to my feet, calling out her name, but there was only silence. As I made my way back through the mansion, I realized that we were not alone. The dolls seemed to be watching me, their glassy eyes following my every move, and then I saw her. Sarah, standing in front of the ornate box. Her eyes were black as coal, and her skin was deathly pale. "Welcome home," she whispered, her voice like a sigh on the wind. I tried to run, but it was too late. The mansion seemed to be closing in around me, its walls pressing down on me like a vice. And then, everything went black once more. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my head throbbing with pain. But this time, I was alone. The mansion was quiet. The only sound, the creaking of the old wooden floorboards beneath my feet. I stumbled to my feet, calling out for Sarah. But there was only silence. And then I saw her. Standing in front of the ornate box, her eyes black as coal. "Welcome home," she whispered, her voice like a sigh on the wind. This time, I knew I would never leave. In the topic, The Exorcist. Here's a 2,000-word horror story inspired by The Exorcist. The possession of Emily Wilson had begun like any other nightmare. At first, it was just small things, toys scattered across the floor, books knocked off shelves, and an inexplicable feeling of being watched. But as the days passed, the occurrences grew more frequent and more disturbing. Emily's eyes would roll back in her head, and she would speak in a voice that wasn't her own. The words were always dark and twisted, and they sent shivers down the spines of anyone who heard them. Her parents, Mark and Sarah, had tried everything to help their daughter. They had taken her to see doctors, therapists, and even exorcists, but nothing seemed to work. As the weeks turned into months, Emily's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would lash out at her parents in fits of rage, and she would become catatonic for hours on end. It was as if something inside her was slowly taking over, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. One night, Mark received a call from a local priest, Father Michael. He had heard about Emily's possession and offered to help. Mark was skeptical at first, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Father Michael arrived at the Wilson household just as the sun was setting. He was a tall, imposing man with a kind face and a stern expression. He listened intently as Mark told him about Emily's behavior, and he nodded gravely as he listened. "I will do everything in my power to help your daughter," Father Michael promised. "But I must warn you, the process of exorcism is not for the faint of heart." Mark nodded, his eyes filled with desperation. He knew that he had nothing to lose at this point. Over the next few weeks, Emily's behavior grew more and more extreme. She would thrash about in her bed, screaming and crying out in a voice that wasn't her own. Her parents were exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but Father Michael remained steadfast, performing daily rituals and prayers to try and calm the demon that was possessing Emily. Mark and Sarah watched in awe as he worked his magic, their daughter's eyes rolling back in her head as she spoke in a voice that sent shivers down their spines. As the days passed, Emily's behavior grew more and more erratic. She would lash out at her parents in fits of rage, and she would become catatonic for hours on end. It was as if something inside her was slowly taking over, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. One night, Father Michael performed a final ritual, one that he had never attempted before. He stood in Emily's bedroom, his hands clasped together in prayer, as he called out to the demon that was possessing their daughter. "Leave this child," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "Leave her be." The room fell silent, and for a moment, there was nothing but stillness. And then, Emily's eyes rolled back in her head, and she spoke in a voice that wasn't her own. "You can't save her," the voice said, its tone dripping with malice. "You'll never be able to save her." Mark and Sarah watched in horror as Emily's body began to contort and twist, her limbs elongating like rubber. Her eyes turned black as coal, and she spoke again, her voice growing louder and more menacing. "I am the devil," she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. "And I will never be defeated." As the ritual continued, Emily's body began to change. Her skin grew pale and clammy, her eyes bulged from their sockets, and her limbs twisted into impossible shapes. Mark and Sarah watched in horror as their daughter was consumed by the demon, their minds shattered by what they saw. And when it was all over, Emily was gone. The demon had taken her, leaving behind a shell of a girl who was no longer human. Mark and Sarah were left to pick up the pieces, their lives forever changed by the horror that they had witnessed. As for Father Michael, he was never seen again. Some say he was driven mad by the horrors he had witnessed, while others claim that he was taken by the demon itself. But one thing is certain: the possession of Emily Wilson had left an indelible mark on the world, a reminder that some things are better left unseen. Years later, when Mark and Sarah were old and gray, they would sit together in their rocking chairs, watching as their grandchildren played in the garden below. And sometimes, without warning, they would hear a faint whispering in the wind, a soft, raspy voice that seemed to say a single word over and over again: "Emily." It was a sound that would haunt them for the rest of their lives, a reminder of the horror that had taken their daughter from them. And as the years went by, they knew that they would never be able to truly let go of the past, for in the end, it was the memories of Emily Wilson that would forever define them. Thank you for joining me on this terrifying journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, some legends are more than just stories. Good night, and sweet dreams.